A man sits in a crowded courtyard in first-century Judea, tearing off a piece of unleavened bread with traitors, and they level an accusation that will ultimately echo all the way to a Roman cross. This man receives sinners and eats with them. Gentile territory. The descent is fast. The silver flows freely. The false friends gather. And then the money vanishes. A severe famine sweeps the land. The hunger bites hard against his ribs. He hires himself out to a citizen of that country. A Jewish heir is reduced to feeding Gentile pigs. He stands ankle-deep in the mud. The sharp stench of swine feces burns his nose. He stares at the tough, brown carob pods the animals are eating. His stomach cramping with a pain so deep he wants to steal the pig's food. He has hit the bottom of the fraction. He is the one sheep in the ravine. He is the one coin in the dirt. He is in a state of apolumi, utterly unraveling. And in the mud, he comes to himself. He rehearses a legal defense, a desperate negotiation. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. He turns back toward home. He knows exactly what awaits him at the edge of his hometown. In the ancient world, when a Jewish boy lost his family inheritance among Gentiles and dared to return, the community performed a ceremony called the kazaza. The elders would meet him at the edge of the village. They would smash a large clay pot on the ground at his feet. Jesus hears the muttering. He stops eating. He does not quote a scripture to defend himself. He tells a story. Then he tells another. They would formally declare him cut off from his people. The boy expects the broken clay. He expects the spitting. He braces for the cold. Hard stares of the village elders. He begins the long walk back, but the men listening to Jesus are entirely unprepared for what the patriarch is about to do. The boy is walking toward the edge of town, bracing his body for the crash of the clay pot. But Jesus drops a detail into the narrative that completely shatters the cultural script. Luke chapter 15, verse 20, Jesus tells the Pharisees, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him." Look closely at the translation. The English text says the father felt compassion. It sounds like a warm, abstract sentiment, a soft stirring in the heart of an old man watching the horizon. The word Jesus actually uses is the Greek splagnizomai. It is not a gentle word. Its root is splagna, which literally translates to the internal organs, the intestines, the bowels, the gut. In the ancient world, the gut, not the heart, was considered the physical center of the deepest, most violent human emotions. Then he tells a third. Most people read Luke chapter 15, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son as three sweet, interchangeable metaphors. Splagnizomai describes a physical sickness. It is a visceral, cramping pain in the stomach, an agony so sharp it forces the human body into sudden motion. The father's response is not a polite emotional shift. It is a biological reaction. And what that gut-wrenching pain produces is a public scandal. The text says, the patriarch ran. In a first-century Middle Eastern honor culture, men of wealth, age, and status absolutely do not run. To run, a patriarch must gather his long, heavy robes in his hands and pull them up above his knees. He must expose his bare legs to the eyes of the village. It is culturally degrading. It is a deliberate act of self-humiliation. The father does not care. He sprints through the dirt streets, kicking up dust, running past the stone houses, past the murmuring neighbors, and past the village elders who are holding the clay pots of the kazaza ceremony. He does not run simply because he is excited to see his child. He runs to reach the boy before the village does. He absorbs the public mockery of his exposed legs and a breathless sprint so he can throw himself over the filth-covered, pig-scented shoulders of his son before a single stone of rejection can be thrown. The run is not just a display of affection, about a God who loves to find missing things. Most people assume Jesus is simply repeating himself for emphasis, offering a warm sentiment to comfort. It is a rescue mission. The boy tries to stutter through his carefully rehearsed legal defense, begging to be a hired servant, but the father cuts him off. He demands the servants bring the best robe, covering the boy's shame. He demands the signet ring, instantly restoring the boy's financial authority. He orders the fattened calf to be slaughtered. The lost fraction has been recovered. The third party of the chapter begins. The music swells. The courtyard fills with dancing. But the trap Jesus set has not fully snapped shut, because there is one more fraction of loss that the Pharisees have not yet calculated. And he is standing out in the fields, listening to the music. The sun drops behind the Judean hills. The older brother walks in from the fields. His muscles ache. The sweat is drying on his neck. His hands are calloused from working the soil. He has spent his entire life building the remaining half of the estate, carrying the weight of the family name, while his brother chased ghosts in a Gentile country. He approaches the house. He expects the quiet, predictable routine of the evening. Instead, he hears the high, piercing notes of a reed flute. He hears the rhythmic thumping of sandals on the packed stone courtyard. He smells the heavy, unmistakable scent of the fattened calf roasting over an open fire. He stops in the shadows. He calls a servant over. The outcasts sitting at his table. They hear the 3 parables and think it is just one simple message delivered 3 times. The servant delivers the news, breathless with excitement. The younger brother has returned. The father has killed the prized calf. The household is eating. They are drinking. The older brother does not drop his tools in joy. He does not rush inside to embrace the boy he thought was dead. He freezes at the edge of the firelight. His jaw tightens. He flatly refuses to step through the door. The music continues inside. The father notices the empty seat at the table. And for the second time in a single day, the patriarch violates every rule of Middle Eastern dignity. He leaves the head table of his own feast. He walks out of the light. He steps into the dark courtyard to plead with a son who is publicly humiliating him in front of the entire village. The older brother unleashes years of buried, boiling resentment. He points a finger at the old man. Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. Listen to the exact vocabulary of his rage. He refuses to say, my brother. He spits out the words, this son of yours. He does not say, I have honored you. He says, I have served you. But if you look closer at the mathematical progression of the loss, at the cultural shockwaves of the characters he invents, and at the specific Greek verbs, the Greek word he uses is douloo. It literally translates to work as a slave. The older brother is not protecting the family's honor. He is keeping a ledger for his entire life. He has viewed the father's house as a transactional economy. He thought his obedience was a currency. He thought his sweat was purchasing his place at the table. He thought his moral perfection made him superior to the boy who ran away. He looks at the grace violently poured out on the rebel, and his entire accounting system collapses. If the father can simply forgive the younger son and hand him a signet ring, then the older brother's perfect attendance record feels completely worthless. He is enraged because he realizes his rigid morality did not purchase a single thing the younger brother didn't just receive for free. The trap Jesus set back in verse 4 has finally snapped shut. Jesus is no longer talking about a fictional family in a distant village. The lens has zoomed in all the way. He is looking directly at the Pharisees standing just outside the courtyard, muttering in the shadows, refusing to come in and eat with the tax collectors. Jesus has brought the entire 3-part masterpiece right to their feet. But the true tragedy of the chapter is found in exactly where the story abruptly ends. For 2,000 years, we have called this the parable of the prodigal son. We focus all our attention on the dramatic rebellion of the younger boy. Hiding in the text, you start to see something the Sunday school reading completely misses. This chapter is not a collection of bedtime stories. It is a trap, his desperate hunger, the sharp stench of the pig pen, and his tearful, dust-covered walk back up the road. We assume the story is primarily a warning about wild living and the beautiful grace that rescues us from the absolute bottom. But we fundamentally misread the architecture of the chapter if we stop there. Jesus did not weave this three-part masterpiece because tax collectors and sinners were crying in the mud. He told it because religious elites were complaining in the courtyard. The target of this parable is not the younger son. The target is the older brother. And the older brother represents a spiritual condition that is far more deceptive and far more lethal than blatant, visible rebellion. When you break the rules and ruin your life, you usually know you are lost. You can feel the sharp hunger in your gut. You can smell the dirt on your own clothes. You hit a jagged rock bottom that eventually forces you to look up. But when you keep all the rules, when you maintain a flawless attendance record, when you memorize the texts and rigidly police the theological boundaries of your community, you can easily mask a dead heart behind a pristine resume. It is a carefully constructed, three-part rhetorical ambush designed to completely dismantle the worldview of the men standing outside the courtyard. The older brother is surrounded by the physical comforts of the father's wealth, but he relates to him strictly as an employer. He sees the relationship as a legal contract to be aggressively maintained, not a covenant to be enjoyed. His obedience is not an expression of love. It is a strategy for control. This is the profound danger of moralism. It allows you to build a comprehensive defense mechanism against grace, using the very raw materials of religion to distance yourself from the heart of God. You can hold on to your theological purity so tightly that your knuckles turn white, while simultaneously harboring a deep, bitter resentment toward a God who refuses to grade on your personal curve. The Pharisees standing outside that courtyard in the first century were the ultimate older brothers. They were furious because Jesus was freely distributing the very presence of God to people who had not put in the hours, who had not washed their hands in the cold stone ritual basins, who had not kept the microscopic details of the ceremonial law. They believed they had earned the right to control who was allowed inside the house. But Jesus leaves the parable hanging open, suspended on a single unresolved cord. The father stands in the dark courtyard, looking at his rigid, angry son, and he offers a final, desperate plea. And the trap only works if you read all three stories as a single, escalating countdown. To feel the weight of what Jesus is doing, Saul, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this, your brother was dead, and is alive. He was lost, and is found. Jesus intentionally ends the narrative right there. He refuses to provide a neat conclusion. He does not tell us if the older brother drops his heavy ledger. He does not tell us if he uncurls his fists, walks through the illuminated doorway, and joins the feast. He stops speaking because the conclusion of the story was never meant to be spoken. A shepherd walks into the freezing ravines, and a wandering sheep comes home on his shoulders. A woman sweeps a dirt floor in the dark, and a silver dowry catches the light. A patriarch liquidates his own estate and hands it to a son who wished him dead. A starving boy rehearses a legal defense and receives a signet ring before he can finish. An old man hikes up his heavy robes and sprints to absorb the shame of the village. You have to realize that the stakes are rising with every word he speaks. The tension is building. An obedient brother refuses to cross the threshold and remains trapped by his own flawless ledger. And a father leaves the head of the table a second time to beg his most rigid child to come inside. 3 stories. 1 unbroken invitation. But maybe the part that stays with me most is that empty space at the very end of the chapter. Jesus leaves the older brother standing out in the cold, listening to the music, clutching his bitter accounting. He leaves the story hanging in the air because he was looking directly into the eyes of the Pharisees muttering in the courtyard. He was handing them the pen. The ending wasn't spoken because it had to be lived. They had to decide if they were going to stay outside in the dark with their pride, or drop their ledgers and come to the table where the sinners were already eating. If you are in a season where your obedience feels like a heavy, exhausting chain, this is a place to sit. If you are keeping a meticulous ledger of everything you have done right, wondering why the music inside the house sounds so distant. It might be time to drop the ledger in the dirt. The Father is not asking for your resume. The heat is heavy, the air thick with the smell of roasted fish, dust, and unwashed bodies. The lens is zooming in, and the entire sequence begins with a shepherd, a wilderness, and a very specific fraction. He is not asking you to work as a slave in the fields of your own perfectionism. You do not have to purchase your seat at the table with your sweat. He is simply asking for your company. And may the God who sprints down dust-choked roads to find the rebel, and steps into the dark courtyard to find the rule follower, meet you exactly where you are standing today. If this reached something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to earn what they already have. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. Jesus looks at the Pharisees, the most elite religious scholars in the nation, and opens his defense with a question that borders on insulting. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? To a first-century Pharisee, the premise itself is absurd. Shepherds in the ancient Near East were not the sanitized, glowing figures of modern stained glass windows. They were often viewed as transient, ceremonially unclean, and fundamentally untrustworthy, living out in the dirt and the elements. A respectable religious leader would never identify with a shepherd. More than that, the mathematics make no sense. A rational businessman does not abandon 99 sheep in the open wilderness, a landscape of jagged limestone craters, steep ravines, and plunging night temperatures to chase down a single wandering animal. 1 out of 100 is a 1% loss. In an agrarian economy, a 1% loss is a rounding error. It is the acceptable cost of doing business in a harsh and unforgiving world. But the detail that changes how you read this entire chapter, you can hear the low, rhythmic hum of conversation, the clinking of clay cups, the sound of men who are usually despised laughing out loud, is the specific word Jesus uses to describe what happens to that 1% fraction. Luke chapter 15, verse 4. The English translation tells us, the shepherd goes after the sheep that is lost. The word Jesus uses here is the Greek apolumi. It appears 90 times in the New Testament, and its primary meaning is far more violent than simply misplacing an item. The verb apolumi means to destroy, to perish, to be utterly ruined. When a wineskin bursts and the wine spills out into the dust, it is apolumi. It is the exact same word used in John 3:16, when it promises that whoever believes in him shall not perish. That root changes everything about the tension of this story. When Jesus describes the condition of the sheep and later the coin, and eventually the son, he is not talking about something that is simply out of sight. Apolumi is an active state of unraveling. The sheep is not merely misplaced. It is actively dying. The shepherd does not weigh the 99 against the one because he understands the severity of the vocabulary. He absorbs the risk, steps into the cold wind of the Judean hills, and searches until he can locate the heavy, dirt-caked animal and hoist it onto his own shoulders. The Pharisees, listening in the courtyard, might dismiss this first story. These are the tax collectors, the extorters, the sinners, and Jesus is eating with them. He is not just preaching to them from a safe distance. A sheep is just livestock, prone to wandering off, and a 1 in 100 loss is easy enough to shrug off as a hazard of the trade. But Jesus is just getting started. He is about to tighten the lens, moving the camera from the vast, open wilderness into a dark, claustrophobic room, and the fraction of loss is about to multiply by 10. The open wilderness disappears. The walls close in. A woman stands in a small, windowless stone house in a Judean village. The air is stagnant. The dirt floor is uneven and packed hard. Jesus drops the second story on the crowd. A woman has 10 silver drachmas. She loses 1. The mathematical pattern begins to emerge. 1 sheep out of 100. 1 coin out of 10. The circle is tightening. The fraction of loss is no longer 1%. It is 10%. And the stakes of the missing object have changed entirely. A sheep is livestock, a commodity traded in the markets. But for a first-century peasant woman, 10 silver coins represent far more than purchasing power. These 10 coins are likely strung together on a silver chain. They form her ketubah, her dowry, her wedding headdress. In a patriarchal society where widows easily starve, these 10 pieces of silver are her financial insurance. They are her dignity. He is sharing a table. In the ancient Near East, sharing a meal is not a casual networking event. It is a covenant of peace. If her husband dies, this is what keeps her from begging in the streets. The lost coin is not a misplaced piece of metal. It is a fractured identity. She does not wait for the morning sun to filter through the doorway. She strikes a flint. She lights a clay lamp. The sharp smell of burning olive oil fills the cramped, dark room. She grabs a rough broom made of dried palm fronds. She sweeps the dirt floor. She moves the heavy clay water pots. She bends her knees, ignoring the ache, and holds the flickering flame close to the ground. You can hear the harsh, rhythmic scraping of the twigs against the stone. She searches carefully. She searches desperately. Notice the theological progression hiding in the details. The sheep wandered off by its own nature. It had legs to run. It had a voice to bleat out in the cold night. The coin has no agency at all. It cannot move. It cannot call out. It simply drops into the dark and lies trapped in the dust. It is entirely dependent on the one holding the lamp. She sweeps until the light catches a sliver of silver in the grime. She picks it up. She wipes it clean. She runs outside into the narrow street. She calls her neighbors. "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." It is a public declaration of acceptance. To eat with a man is to say, with your mouth and your presence, that you are at one with him. 2 stories are now resting on the table. The crowd of sinners is listening. The Pharisees in the courtyard are still muttering. They see the pattern Jesus is building, but they do not yet realize they are walking into a trap. The loss has moved from the open field to the intimate home. The shepherd went out. The woman sweeps inside. The value has jumped from 1% to 10%. But Jesus is not finished. The fractions are about to collapse completely. The camera is about to zoom in on a human face, and the final loss will demand a price no self-respecting Jewish patriarch would ever agree to pay. The first 2 stories are not the main point of the chapter. They are the bait. Look at the architectural design of what Jesus is building right in front of the Pharisees. He is using a brilliant rhetorical device, common in ancient Jewish debate, establishing a pattern of agreement before delivering a fatal blow to the opponent's worldview. He asks about the sheep, a 1 in 100 loss. The religious elite internally agree. Of course, any shepherd goes out into the wind, and the rocks for his property. He asks about the coin, a 1 in 10 loss. They internally agree again. Of course, a poor woman lights a lamp, and standing just outside the perimeter of the courtyard, watching the bread being passed, are the religious elite, the Pharisees and the scribes, and scrapes the dirt floor for her life savings. He is forcing them, step by step, to validate a fundamental theological premise. He is making them concede that when something valuable is in a state of apolumi, when it is perishing and unraveling, the only appropriate response is to abandon normal protocol, search relentlessly, and throw a loud, public party when the object is recovered. You can almost hear the mental arithmetic clicking into place behind the eyes of the scribes. They are nodding along to the mathematics of grace, completely unaware of the corner they are being painted into, because the fractions are escalating. 1 out of 100, 1 out of 10. The next logical step in the progression is catastrophic. The loss is about to become 1 out of 2. A 50% amputation of a household, and the object of loss is no longer an animal shivering in a dark ravine, or a piece of silver reflecting a clay lamp. It is a human being with agency, a mind, and a voice. If watching this mathematical pattern emerge from the text is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, you can see the rigid lines of their fringed garments, the physical distance they maintain to keep themselves ceremonially clean. You can hear them muttering in the shadows. We go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Jesus introduces a patriarch and two sons. The Pharisees listening in the courtyard know exactly how the cultural rules of a Jewish family operate in the first century. They know the rigid, unbending boundaries of honor and shame that dictate every social interaction in their world. They know exactly how a respectable patriarch is supposed to maintain his authority over his household. But the story Jesus is about to unfold will violate every single rule of their society. The sheep and the coin were lost, but they did not deliberately insult their owners. The younger son's impending departure will be entirely different. Before he ever packs a bag or sets foot on a road leading out of the village, he has to ask for his share of the estate. In a Middle Eastern honor culture, asking for an inheritance, while the patriarch is still breathing, is not just a faux pas. It is a statement that you value the man's wealth more than his life. The younger son's demand is not a financial transaction. It is a verbal assassination. The younger son stands in the family courtyard. The heat of the day hangs in the air. The servants are nearby. The Greek word Luke uses here is diagoguzo, a deep, guttural complaining, a visceral, physical disgust. They look at the table. They look at the teacher. The older brother is within earshot, and the boy looks directly at his father and speaks the words, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." The courtyard goes completely silent. In the honor-shame culture of the first century Middle East, these words carry a singular, devastating translation. The boy is not asking for an early allowance. He is looking at his living father and saying, "I wish you were dead." The Pharisees listening to Jesus expect the patriarch to react with immediate, violent discipline. The cultural script demands a public beating. It demands the son be driven out to preserve the honor of the household. The father does not shout. He does not strike the boy. He walks into the house. He retrieves the ledgers. The Greek text in verse 12 says the father divided to them his bios, his livelihood, his life. He liquidates his own estate, selling off pieces of ancestral land, enduring the mockery of the village, just to hand the boy the silver he demands. This is not a transfer of wealth. It is a voluntary amputation. The boy packs his bags. He walks out of the gate. The dust settles on the road. He travels to a far country.